I was around 16 years old when this happened to me. It was just me and my dad at our house, and since he was a businessman that traveled frequently, I was left home alone quite often. First of all, I'm going to do my best to describe to you the layout of my house so you can better understand my situation. My house is pretty small, since it's just my father, my dog, and me living in it. There's a long hallway full of full-size windows separating my dad's room and mine. Our dog loved to look out the windows, so we always kept them open enough for her to look out. I'm the last room at the end of the hallway. In between the two rooms is my bathroom and a spare room. All the rest is irrelevant. Let's get to it. It was around 11 p.m. when the worst night of my life began. My dad was passed out in the bed after a long day, and I was mindlessly dancing around my house getting ready for bed. I hopped in my shower, not knowing what was coming ahead, and of course, like the cringe-worthy horror movie, my dog starts aggressively barking up a storm. With my excessive knowledge of how it turns out for the girl in the movies, I go out to explore. I head to my room to throw some clothes on while my dog is still shitting a brick. Months before, I'm not sure how I managed to break my door handle, but you don't have to twist the knob to open it. All it needs is a small push. Scared shitless, I barely managed to put a shirt on when my dog opened the door. I looked to see her enter my room while in the midst of barking, and that's when I saw it. There's only one window that has vision to the opening of my room, and in the corner of it, I saw a face. A face so seemingly sinister that I can still see it years after. It was dark, so I took a second to comprehend what I just saw. But when I finally realized it, I screamed. My dad owns lots of guns, so when he heard me scream bloody murder, he ran out with a pistol. He asked me what happened, and I could barely mutter what I saw. He ran outside to see if the man with the terrifying face was still near. We stood out there for a minute scanning the area. A man was casually strolling towards us from the opposite direction from about 100 yards away. I knew it was him. I got that feeling in my stomach that you can't mistake. It was like he was trying to cover up that he was there by coming from a different direction. That bastard didn't fool me. Holding up his gun, I could have sworn my dad was going to shoot. The man brushed these threats off easily. My dad and I went back inside. He went back to bed like nothing had happened, but I could not sleep a wink. I kept thinking he was going to come back and hurt me because of the threats we said to him. We called the cops the next morning. They came and scoped out our house. He looked around the house trying to calm me down, but I was still pretty shaken up. He went to the front yard, and that's when he saw it. In the front windows in the long hallway, there were small bushes. Nothing much. The cop, from outside, went to the window that had a view of my room, and there it was. If he tried to tell me the news without making me more upset, he failed. There were indents in the dirt right in front of the window. The cop said,
"He knew where he needed to look for you, and it seems as if he had come here more than once because of the broken pieces of bush and the divots in the ground."
Turns out, he was the nephew of my old neighbor, and he had been staying there for months. Never arrested, never got in trouble, probably barely got a slap on the wrists. But at least he was gone now. How long had he been watching me? I'll never know. All I know is I keep my door shut, and I never keep the blinds open. So creepy nephew that had watched me for who knows how long, let's not meet.
This happened to me about 10 years ago. when I was 17. It was a Friday night, and a friend was driving me home from a party. Neither of us had anything to drink, something I should clarify here. We turned into my street about 11 p.m. This street is a dead end and a very bushy area with very little lighting, so it's quite pretty during the day, but unsettling at night. And topping it off, the creepy factor was a swing that hung from a large tree in front of a house at the top of the street as you turn in. It had been there longer than when I was born, and though it was quite rickety, it still seemed functional. Having said that, I don't have any concrete memories of it being used in the past 5 or 10 years. I'd always joked about how creepy this swing was to people when we went past it. But this time, it was even creepier, because as we drove past, there was a little girl sitting on it. She looked upset and just had her head down, slowly swinging, but not letting her feet off the ground. She slowly looked up as we drove past and gave us a strange glare. I guessed she was no older than 8, and as unusual as it was for her to be out this late, my friend and I both assumed she had a fight with her parents and was sulking outside or something. And ultimately, we just really didn't care enough to think it was important at the time. My friend kept driving for another 15 seconds till we reached my house halfway down the street, which was about 250 meters from the swing. We stopped outside my driveway, facing the top of the street, but as often happened, we ended up sitting in the car, chatting about school, girls, and all that stuff that felt super deep and meaningful at that age. About 10 minutes into our conversation, we noticed some movement at the top of the street as the girl got off the swing and walked onto the middle of the road. She turned and started slowly walking towards us. As I mentioned, the street was dimly lit, with only 3 street lamps between her and the car. For several seconds, she walked towards us. We couldn't see her very well, and she would emerge far closer than she had been before she stepped into the darkness. I drew attention to it and joked how creepy it was. My friend laughed along. The movie The Ring had only come out a few years prior, and the fact that she was pale and all in white just accentuated it. Really, the only difference was her wispy blonde hair. As she emerged into the light of the second closest street lamp, about 100 meters away, the tone definitely changed. We were both still laughing somewhat, but it was definitely more nervous, and we were whispering, "Oh, crap, crap," as she got closer. It was far less funny because somehow this little girl clearly wasn't a little girl. She was an adult woman, probably in her late 50s, early 60s. It was unmistakably the same person that was on the swing. We'd seen her get up off of it, but it was as if she had aged by 50 years as she walked down the street towards us. She was clearly looking in our direction, but squinting because of the car's headlights, so she probably couldn't see us directly. The woman was now about 20 meters away, and I could see her a lot more clearly in the car's headlights. She looked slightly haggard, and the outsides of her eyes were reddish, as if she'd been crying or hadn't slept in a long while. As she drew closer to us with each meter, I couldn't stop thinking, that was 100% a little girl 20 minutes ago. What the actual heck? These were all the thoughts I didn't verbalize at the time, but it was clear we were both getting creeped out. When she was about 5 meters away, my friend turned the engine off, auto-locked the doors, and turned the headlights off. We slouched in our seats as the woman scowled in our direction, walking right past the car, mumbling something to herself. After about 5 seconds, we sat upright again, laughing at the situation now that we were more confident it was just creepy and not dangerous. My friend commented she seemed drunk, which I accepted, and we continued to talk for a few minutes. But I was still somewhat unsettled. I didn't look back to see where the woman was, but I knew this was a dead-end street, and there was nowhere for that woman to have gone. I knew for a fact she didn't live in any of the houses that way, but hoped she was just visiting or something. By this stage, my friend and I had shifted in our seats, so we were facing each other. Then suddenly, just like a jump scare in a horror movie, I saw the woman quickly emerge from behind my friend's head and stare right at me through the driver's window. She cocked her head as if she was curious at my reaction and leaned forward till her nose was almost touching the glass. My friend's eyes and mouth were wide, and he slowly turned around. But by then she had stumbled about a meter away from the car and was no longer looking at us, so it was far less disturbing to look at, all things considered. We sat in silence and just watched her continue to stumble off until she was in the gap of darkness between the first and second streetlight. Even after waiting about 5 minutes, we never saw her emerge. But we called it a night, me bolting from the car to my house, and my friend driving off at full speed with his doors locked. Since then, I've told a few people that story as a fun anecdote about how freaky my street is, and every time I pass that swing to this day, I think about it. I've reconciled that clearly we just didn't see the woman properly at first, and she wasn't the 8-year-old we thought we saw. But when my friend and I still talk about it, there's an underlying sense of, nah, we totally didn't see her. Every time.
When I was about 7 years old, my father bought a few hundred acres in southern Mississippi, about 1.5 hours west of Mobile, Alabama. He built a small cabin on top of a hill that was in the middle of a large field surrounded by woods. This house was about 5 miles from a paved road. To get to our land, it took nearly 10 minutes of driving down dirt roads from the main highway, which was south of the house. About a quarter mile north from the house, he built a small lake. Well, more like a pond. It was about as long as a football field, but wider. To get to the lake from the house, you could take Route A, which was a hard-packed dirt road that was lined with dogwood trees. It was beautiful in the spring. Route B was about 100 yards east of Dogwood Lane, and we named it Vampire Trail, because it was always so gloomy. The trees blocked out the sun on the brightest days, and it had a slight decline as you walked toward the lake. I say walked because this trail was not for vehicles. Thick woods filled the area outside and in between both trails. One morning during the fall, my parents and my little sister had gone to get ice cream and do some shopping. This trip would take them at least an hour or two. I was 10 years old, so I decided to go fishing while listening to Bama play Ole Miss. The game was the usual Bama win, so I thought I could ease the boredom of a blowout by fishing in the well-stocked lake. So I carried my pole, small radio, and my small ice chest. I had an Airedale Terrier named Bully that never left my side, and it was on this day I realized just how awesome he really was. On to the lake we went. Picture a large oval, roughly the size of a football field but larger, with an L-shaped pier in the southeast corner. Vampire Lane opened up to a more severe decline to the shore and then the small pier. Across the lake on the west side there was a narrow tree line that separated the shore from Dogwood Lane. The north side of the lake was the dam, and the south ended in thick and swampy woods. Fortunately for me, I realized later. About 5 minutes after I threw out my line and 2 Bama touchdowns later, I got that feeling. It's a feeling I have come to recognize well, and it may have saved my life this day. The feeling of being watched by something dangerous. Bully must have felt it too, because a few seconds later, I could hear him growling low and staring across the lake to the west, to the tree line that separated Dogwood Lane from the lake. I turned my head in that direction, and almost immediately, my eyes lit on what I thought to be a half silhouette of a large man behind a tree. It was too far to make out details, but close enough to be sure of what I was actually seeing. Almost 5 minutes went by, and right before I scolded myself for an overactive imagination, the half silhouette moved behind a tree, slowly. Bully stood and growled louder, and I told him quietly to stop. And I turned my head north towards the dam, while keeping my eyes and attention rooted to that tree. Over the next 10 minutes, which felt like hours, I watched while this figure moved slowly from tree to tree, always north, and always facing me. The saying, "scared stiff," was something I found to be true. For some reason I thought it important that whoever or whatever it was did not know that I was aware. I finally realized that the figure's path was bringing it closer to the dam, which would make its path to me shorter and easier. My paralysis broke, and I casually put down the fishing pole and started walking towards Vampire Lane. As an adult, I was in the army for 11 years as an MP, but not turning to look over my shoulder during that walk was the hardest thing I have ever done. In my mind's eye, whatever it was screaming across the dam towards me. When I hit the tree line, I broke into a run. As I was running, Bully dashed ahead of me, and my anger turned into admiration as he stopped some 20 yards ahead of me and faced north until I passed him. He continued this action the entire run home. My dog was watching my back. Although I can grasp the awesomeness of this now, at the time I was so scared that I was literally sick. Even at such a young age, I knew that a large man watching and trying to creep up on a 10-year-old boy was up to no good. When I reached the cabin, I immediately locked the door and got one of my dad's shotguns as well as his .38 revolver. I sat at the large front window, my eyes glued to both trail openings and the woods between them. My family returned shortly after, and for some reason, I did not mention what happened. I never felt safe there again. When me and my friends or my little sister wanted to go anywhere other than the area around the cabin, I made sure my parents were with us. What scares me the most, though, is the fact that our closest neighbors were about 2 miles northwest of us, with thick woods in between as the crow flies. Who or what the hell was watching me from the woods that day? Guess I may never know. I sometimes wish I could go back there as a grown man with military training as I am now. Bully lived a full life and was put to sleep peacefully as a very old but great dog, the best dog that I have ever known. My dad sold the land a few years after this incident and bought a beach house on the beautiful Gulf Coast. Oh, I didn't mind that at all.
This happened to me during my senior year of high school, back in 2007. I was, of course, living at my parents' house, who weren't extremely well off, so we didn't have any central heat or air. This happened not long before my graduation, so April or May, which meant some nights it was hot outside, so we regularly opened the windows to put a box fan in the window. My room was a corner room, so I had 2 windows, one facing the front of the house towards the street, and one facing the side of the house. My bed ran parallel to the side window, with maybe a foot of space between that wall and my bed. The window came to about the middle of my bed. Directly under the window was my outlet. It hadn't been a very warm week, so my box fan wasn't in my window. One night, I was sitting in my bed, working on some report for school. About 30 or 40 minutes into it, I see my laptop battery was low, so I decided to plug it in. I grabbed the charger out of my bag and leaned over to the outlet under my window. As I was plugging it in, I glanced up at the window and saw a man staring down at me. I had a brief heart attack and scrambled away from the window, never taking my eyes off him. He was just standing there, leaning over and looking straight at me. He looked angry, like I had viciously attacked him on a very personal level. This might be a good time to mention that I didn't even have a screen on my window. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I couldn't even scream for help. I don't even know if anyone was home. We stayed like that for what felt like forever, but it may have only been a few seconds. Just frozen, staring at each other. I wanted to get off my bed and head for the door, but I was afraid to turn my back to him. Finally, he started shaking his head, and he said, "Anyone could crawl through." I don't know why, but the way he said "crawl through" just sent shivers down my spine. Maybe it was the fact that that was what he chose to say. I imagined him crawling through my window every night without me knowing, and it just filled me with even more horror. I threw myself off the bed and ran for the door and screamed for my brother and my dad while running down the hallway. They came out and I frantically told them what had happened, and they ran outside to check around the house, but didn't find anything. I moved out not long after graduation, but I will never forget the way he said those words. "Anyone can crawl through."